Now, last night, Robert Colville, the director of the Centre for Policy Studies, editor-in-chief of CapEx and a columnist for the Sunday Times, suggested that there was a good case for paying MPs more. It would reduce the temptation, he suggested, for some to dip their hands in the murky money pot of lobbying. I know Robert and respect him enormously, and I observed in the context of what he'd said that in the United States, congressional perks, and indeed pay, are much higher. Pay nearly $200,000 and more than $1 million in staff and office expenses. Despite that, the lobbying and what they call pork barrelling that they get up to make some of our lot really look like rank amateurs at an amateur dramatics night out in the local repertory theatre. London's littered with lobbying companies offering to guide clients through the complexities of Parliament, the intricacies of government, and the MPs ever present to offer a helping hand for a consideration. Many of them have former top civil servants, ex-special advisers and former ministers on their staff. But in the United States, to put it in context, there is the glittering Crystal City across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., and many of those gleaming tower blocks are occupied by lobbyists. So my plea is, let's keep it in proportion as well. Also, let's not delude ourselves that Owen Paterson, whatever he did or didn't do, was a groundbreaker. For as long as I can remember, MPs and ministers, serving and retired, have been dipping their toes in those murky waters. Also, in recent days, we've been reminded of the expenses scandal, cash for questions, passports for pals and all the rest of it. And what's more, it isn't just the politicians, as I hinted a moment ago. Retired generals and admirals and air marshals find themselves on the boards of big defence contractors shortly after leaving the service of Her Majesty. Senior civil servants are certainly snapped up by companies hoping to do big deals with government. And not a few broadcasters, retired and still working, make a pretty penny from training big business types on how to come across well on television and radio, with a pointer or two, no doubt, on how to skate over those trickier questions. I mention all of those examples because our theme today is how do we restore trust in politics. They all play their part. As I said at the beginning of this programme, I once wanted to be an MP, not to feather my nest or line my pockets, but to change the world and make the UK a better place. In my naivety, perhaps, but I swear, as I look you in the eyes, that that is true. And many of my friends at university, in the National Union of Students, felt the same. And some of them did go on to do exactly that. Charles Clarke, not a word of scandal against him. He got sacked because some immigrants went missing. But he himself, fingers absolutely excluded from any pot. I mean, in that sense, I do think that Robert Colville's point about pay might help. But it isn't the whole answer. It needs to be made crystal clear that MPs are there to help solve their constituents' problems, to make good law and to avoid bad law. If they become a minister, to govern with dignity and integrity. If in opposition, to interrogate the government's performance and its proposals, to test to destruction, if needs be, its policies and its proposals. Oh, yes, and to offer a clear alternative, however difficult that sometimes seems to be. To do all of that, in my humble opinion, is not impossible. It does, however, require a certain type of person. Honest. Rich, not necessarily in cash, but in integrity. And independent on vested interests. Some say MPs should earn a bob or two, like Michael Heseltine, before going into Parliament. The rich don't need the lobbyists, Luca. But Parliament needs to represent all of the people. That's what Justin Tomlinson meant when he talked about diversity, not gender, colour, race or what have you, but across the whole class system, if they are to represent all of the people. And for that, it needs a wider demographic than simply wealthy fat cats. Others who don't have money turn to the trade unions or even the co-op. It has its own party for financial support. I'm not at all sure that that is any more watertight a response either. So, there are two key points, in my view, to add to those great figures like Joe Twynham and Justin Tomlinson, the great Martin Bell and Alastair Graham, in the sense of what I think. We should seriously consider the remuneration of MPs, but also the costs of representing us. The political parties need to be much more circumspect in candidate selection. The rules on MPs and ministers' conduct need a root and branch review, independent, in my view, of government and with a good non-parliamentary voice on the jury. That was one of Alastair Graham's specific recommendations. There are non-parliamentary voices on the jury. They don't have a vote, and one of them should be the chair of that committee. I think that's a great idea. The penalties for breaches need strengthening. There are men and women of integrity, of morality and of honesty, and we need more of them in the House of Commons and indeed in the House of Lords. No one on a day trip to the cash point should be there, and anyone dipping their fingers in the till should be drummed out. If you want to see how far we've come, watch Blackadder's brilliant episode Dish and Dishonesty, featuring the late, great Vincent Hanna, reporting from the seriously dodgy borough of Dunny-on-the-Wold. If you want to see how far we've still got to go, don't just Google Owen Paterson. I suspect history will judge him almost a bit-part player in a bigger drama, but he might yet be associated with a turning point in the morality and the probity of our politics. Now there's a nice thought to end on.